to fashion a future, to enjoy it, be part of it. And now there is only war. Only in death does duty end.
We are extensions of a single will. We are adjuncts, we are orbitals. We are the periphery of the immortal, not its heart. There are no bystanders in the war of life and death, no place the battle cannot reach. So fight it without remorse or relenting, for death will surely do the same.
You are the bringer of the new age. You are the warden of the old. You are the destroyer. You are the preserver. In the grim dark future, there is only war. A dark tide of warp and Xenos horrors plague every corner of the galaxy the light of humanity touches. The Imperium of mankind. Over 1 million worlds. Trillions of people cradled in the hands of a rotting empire. A dying dream of an age of myth. Filled with zealotry, corruption and death. An empire whose foundation was built by a triumvirate. A master, a sorcerer and a warrior. Constantin Valdor, shield of the emperor, the chief custodian, the captain general of the Legiones Custodes. A man whose true character remained a mystery, even to those close to the heart of the Imperium of man. Who lies behind the personification of the perfect soldier? How does one become the embodiment of the Emperor of mankind's will? His story begins in the 30th millennium. Terra, the birthplace of humanity, home to 1 billion stories and an untold number of lives lived. To gaze upon it, only the imagery of sorrow would be reflected back. A monument to our sins and failures, as a barren wasteland is all that remains. The scars of old night, of the age of strife, where humanity's spanning federation collapsed due to war and violent warp tides. Thousands upon thousands of worlds under the dominion of mankind imploded into shadows of their former selves. Terra, a rotten place, divided into warring realms, who battled over scraps and utilized technology of a golden era lost to mythology. A child would be born into this bleak world. Perhaps he had parents that loved him. That truth would remain a memory lost in what was to come. For a man, nay, a being had travelled vast distances. Armies had crossed continents just for this singular child. He would be claimed, a figure of primordial power, utterly human, and yet so above it, the Emperor of mankind. Was it his great potential? Was it simply fate? Or was it the elimination of a future rival? The truth would never be verbalized. In the hands of this ancient being, a psycho without equal, this child was put through a process that others would only speculate the truth of. The child was reforged on the molecular level. Every atom and fibre of his being, tailored in a genetic manipulation that blurred the boundaries of science and art. He began to grow faster, taller, smarter and stronger, leagues above a mortal man. Psycho conditioning followed him at every stage. Like a compass, every thought, every decision, every achievement pointed north towards one being, the Emperor of mankind. Humanity needed to be ruled if it was to be protected from the horrors of the galaxy and from itself. It was a vision with a singular being at its heart, the arbiter of that future, of the species, and it would be this boy who would be charged with protecting him, and in turn that vision. Any memories or identity of who the boy was and where he had come from were purged in this gradual apotheosis. The being that emerged was a tailored thing, a man, Constantin Valdor. Whether he was the first attempt or simply the first success, he would never know, for the truth of the events were only revealed to him if necessary. You are the bringer of the new age. You are the warden of the old. You are the destroyer. You are the preserver. If humanity was to be where the rising ape met the falling angel, Constantin Valdor was meant to be something greater. His enhanced, enormous frame was flooded with information, battle doctrine, philosophy, knowledge, encompassing all theatres in and outside of war. Valdor's mind was as much a weapon as any blade or the muscles in his enhanced form. For as one of the Emperor's perfect soldiers, he would have to protect his king in numerous theatres of war. His memory was perfect. Finding himself at the moment of his awakening, he would remember everything from that moment on with utterly perfect clarity. His growth was not something maintained at a distance, and his forging to his education saw the personal touch of the Emperor of mankind. They spoke, they confided, and counseled each other. The Emperor was master and mentor. With his strength and power, he would be the bringer of a new age, a road fraught with war and conflict that required a warrior of unparalleled skill, the warden of the old, the Emperor of mankind, a being millennia old, who had seen humanity suffer its mistakes and sought to bring its previous collective wisdom into this age of ignorance and darkness. You are the destroyer. You are the preserver. Valdor was meant to protect the singular being, guiding the dream of the species. He was to be the destroyer of that dream's enemies, its preserver in the millennia to come. Strength, power, knowledge, guidance, all coalescing into one man. As Constantin grew into adulthood, he was a result of the handcrafting of the Emperor. He was utterly unique. He was different. For Constantin, his perception of the mortal man must have made him feel like an outsider. He was human, and yet in the ways in which we define our humanity, he did not fit so neatly into that category. Emotional pain, anger, hatred, love, all were kept in check by a mind handcrafted for duty and servitude. To him, base humanity must have felt chaotic. We are all often slaves to our own emotions, kicking and screaming against an apathetic world. For Constantin, he found it difficult to connect, to understand the irrationality of mankind, only validating the Emperor's statements that the species must be ruled to save us from ourselves. Emerging fully formed, and a being leagues above a mortal man, Constantin Valdor stood alongside his Emperor and Malcador the Sigillite, the Emperor's most trusted advisor within the Himalayan mountains, a triumvirate that began the preparations for the expansion of this new Imperium of mankind. Decades passed, and the Imperium expanded. Others followed the same path as Constantin, elevated through the mysterious process that changed them into superhumans. A handful turned into dozens, and then hundreds. A force of bodyguards so elite that they would never be bested in battle. Defenders of the old world, and the preservers of the new. They were the Emperor's custodians. Inside the Emperor's fortress, the gates were thrown open. The secret work of thousands of geneticists, engineers, administrators and soldiers was unleashed. The time to unite Terra had begun. Constantin and the Emperor's armies rode out, and so the Unification Wars had begun.
Rise, Minister.
The voice was too low, too resonant to be human, nor did it convey anything in the way of human emotion. If statues could speak, they would speak with this assassin's voice.
You know that if I am here, you are already dead. Nothing will change that now.
She sat up slowly, though she refused to slacken her grip on the gun.
Listen,
She said to the golden shape in the darkness.
Negotiation is equally futile.
The killer assured her.
but
As he's begging.
That set off a spark within her. She felt her features harden as her temper ignited her courage.
I wasn't going to beg.
She said, her voice cold.
My apologies then.
The figure made no move.
What of my guards?
You know what I am, Kojizu. You can choose to die alone or you can resist the inevitable, and I will leave this palace only after killing everyone who resides within it.
My son. The thought welled up, bleeding hot and savage.
My son.
She said the words aloud before she could help herself.
He is of an age to serve the Emperor.
Kojizu's hand trembled as it gripped the gun.
No,
She said, and how she loathed herself for the shake in her voice.
he's only 4. Please, no. Not the legions.
He's too young for the legions. There are other fates, Minister.
Her eyes were adjusting even as her blood ran cold. In the half-light of the hours before dawn, she could make out the ornate, overlapping edges of his burnished armor. The suit of golden plate emanated a low thrum, the source of the mechanical purr. In his hands was a long spear, lowered to aim at her. Affixed above the weapon's arm-length blade was the bulky chassis of a bolt gun, clad in reinforced wire work. None of this surprised her. What surprised her was that the killer stood, unhelmed, showing a face that had once been human.
I've never seen one of you like this. I wasn't even sure you had faces.
Now you know otherwise.
Kojizu watched as the assassin tilted his head slightly, hearing the whisper of his priceless mechanics in the collar of his golden armor. Though his towering form was scaled up, whatever genetic meddling his master had performed to enhance the brute's intellect and physicality, no gene weaving could hide his roots. He had been human once, an Albion heritage, perhaps, going by his features beneath the weathered flesh and battle scars.
May I at least know the name of my killer?
He hesitated, and she dared to believe she'd caught him with an unexpected question. Yet his dark eyes never wavered.
My name is Constantin Valdor.
Constantin.
She repeated slowly. Her schooling in Old Earth mythology had been extensive, and she often harkened back to old tales and legends in her speeches, all the better to inspire the teeming masses of godless, hopeless dregs who served her. Now the minister found herself smiling. No matter that her son was to be stolen away to a fate of genetic torment, no matter that her death was a mere breath away, she smiled a mad woman's smile, all teeth and wide eyes.
I am to be killed by a man with an ancient king's name.
So it seems. If you have any last words, I will ensure they reach the Emperor's ears.
Kojizu's lip curled.
Emperor. How I loathe that title.
He is the ruler of this world and master of our species. No title is more appropriate.
She bared her teeth in an expression too ugly and defiant to be a smile.
Have you ever considered just what kind of creature you serve?
Yes,
The dark eyes stared on.
Have you?
master of mankind.
She shook her head, feeling the welcome flare of righteousness.
He isn't even human.
Minister Zu.
The Golden Warrior made a warning of her name, one she didn't heed.
Does he even breathe? Tell me that, custodian. Have you ever heard him breathe? He is a relic, left over from the Dark Age, a weapon left out of its box, now running rampant.
Valdor blinked once. The first time she'd seen him blink so far. The rare human movement was unnerving. To her it felt false, like it had no right taking place upon his statuesque features.
Terra is a thirsty world.
She knew then, with those words, she knew which of her many crimes she was to die for, the one she had least expected. A laugh, queasy and unwanted, tore itself from her throat.
"Oh, you vile slave,"
she said, unable to keep the sick grin from her face.
"Other worlds suffer a similar thirst."
The Golden Killer's eyes had glassed over with an inhuman serenity, made all the more uncomfortable by the living intelligence shining behind it.
Yet none of them hold the war-scarred, irradiated honor of being mankind's cradle. This world is the beating heart of the Great Crusade, Minister. Do you know how many men, women, and children now make their slow way back here? To humanity's first home? Do you know how many pilgrims wish only to see the ancestral earth with their own eyes? How many refugees flee their flawed and failing worlds now the veil of old night has been lifted? Already it is said that unsettled land on the throne world is the most valuable commodity in our nascent Imperium. But this is not so, is it? One resource is far more precious.
She clutched the auto-pistol tighter as he spoke, breathing slowly and calmly, even knowing she was to die. Even knowing she had no hope of drawing the weapon, the body was reluctant to surrender its survival instinct. Instinct demanded she fight to live.
What I did for my people.
And now you will die for what you did for them.
He said without malice.
For that alone?
For that alone. Your other treacheries are meaningless in my master's eyes. Your cleansing pogroms, your trade in forbidden flesh, the army of gene-work detritus you have sequestered in the bunkers beneath the Germanic steppes. The prospect of your rebellion was never a threat to the Pax Imperialis. Your crimes of apostasy are nothing. You're dying for the sin of your harvester machines drinking the last ocean.
For stealing water.
She felt like laughing again, and the sensation wasn't a pleasant one. The laughter was creeping up through her blood, seeking a release.
All of this because I stole water.
It pleases me that you understand the situation, Minister Zhu.
He inclined his head once more, with a curious courtesy and another subtle purr of machine muscles.
Goodbye.
Wait, what of my son? What is his fate?
He will be armed with silver, armored in gold, and burdened by the weight of ultimate expectation.
Zhu swallowed, feeling her skin crawl anew.
Will he live?
The golden statue nodded.
If he is strong.
In that moment, her tremble subsided. The fear bled away, leaving only naked defiance somewhere between relief and hope. She closed her eyes.
Then he will live,
she said. There was a bang, throaty and concussive, and she was falling, drowning, choking in thunder. Constantin marched across the wastelands of Terra, seeing conflict upon every fractured continent. He and his fellow custodians in the beginning were clad in the best equipment the burgeoning empire could find. It began in steel and leathers. Some were lucky enough to equip ancient powered armor, scavenged from their enemy. Constantin, standing side by side with the Emperor, and the chosen few were often outnumbered, outgunned by horrific armies of mutants, corrupted zealots of dark faiths, or regimented militias and mercenary groups. But it was irrelevant. No war was unwinnable, for he was leading them. Constantin's belief was absolute. They were unstoppable. With dust and ash under his feet, Constantin slew a countless number of enemies, each of them utterly overwhelmed by the strength and speed barely perceptible to their fragile mortal minds. It was like a black hole of fate, all possible futures leading to one event horizon: death. Each victory saw the Imperium's territory and numbers expand. Each piece of equipment, each infrastructure and administration was built in tandem, a rapid rate of expansion that bloomed over Terra. Constantin saw the transformation in front of him, as after each conflict, his armor became ceramite, his rifles became proto-bolters, until finally the guardians of the Emperor donned brilliant gold, auramite-powered armor. Constantin and the custodians invoked the imagery the genetic crafting represented. They were symbols as well as warriors, evidence of this Imperium's impending golden age. Constantin and many other custodians, such as Sagittarius, Gessaric, Aemon, and Aquilon, led growing armies of mortal men, but they were not alone in the category of gene-altered soldiers. The Thunder Warriors, superhuman men created with the meshing or specialized vat-grown organs and stimulants poured into adolescence. Stronger, faster and larger than their mortal counterparts. But where Constantin and his custody brothers were a hand-crafted, cell-coded piece of art, these warriors were crude, mass-produced stock, a brutal tidal force that worked as a stampeding mob of bolter and sword. Constantin saw them fight. He led them upon the field, and in those moments the contrast became apparent. In the infamous conflict with the priest king, Mollard Sen, and his fanatics, under the weight of a bone-chilling freeze, he would never forget Constantin, the Emperor, and 30 custodians, alongside thousands of Thunder Warriors and mortal men, crashed against his outnumbering force. Face to face with the leader of the Thunder Warriors, Ushatan donned the Primarch, unleashed a slaughter, and rage that sent shockwaves of alarm through Constantin. The frenzy, the crackle of joy, as blood streaked from the Primarch and his Thunder Warriors. They exuded a vigor and rapture Constantin had never experienced in his disciplined mind. It was alien, unbridled and chaotic. Orders fell upon deaf ears, unable to tear the butchers away from their meat. The Unification War upon Terra was bloody. Decades upon decades of conflict and diplomacy that brought the Imperium to the furthest corners. It was a conquest under the personal hand of the Triumvirate. Many had fallen at the hands of Constantin, not least many of the ruling tyrants and despots such as Minister Koja Zu, with a voice and tone that drew dread from the darkest corners of the human psyche. Constantin had come to put down this obstacle. To Koja Zu, Constantin was barely human. How could any be that large, that imposing? It was frightening, even to her, a warlord who had seen and done nightmarish things. Even him blinking seemed alien, as if he had done the motion to put her at ease, to assure her he was human. Her actions so far had been inconsequential. All her crimes, her sins were nothing, for all her schemes were powerless against the growing Imperium, except for one that affected the heart, the throne world. She had evaporated the last ocean. She had stolen water. She mocked him for the absurdity, but for a mind so focused upon the dreams of his king, there was nothing absurd in dealing with all threats, no matter how little. Perhaps he no longer had the capacity for absurdity. There are no bystanders in the war of life and death, no place the battle cannot reach. So fight it without remorse, or relenting. Kojizu asked what would become of her son. Constantin told her that he would serve the Imperium. The resource would not be wasted. She asked if he would survive, only if he is strong. As the fear and panic left Kojizu, Constantin dealt the blow, feeling absolutely nothing. Constantin took the late warlord's son, and he was offered up and transformed into something greater, just as he was. A warrior who would become the custodian, Ra Endymion. The lingering thoughts remained. Have you ever considered just what kind of creature you serve? The master of mankind. Is he human? Have you ever seen him breathe? He is a relic left over from the Dark Age, a weapon left out of its box, now running rampant. Yes, he knew. Constantin knew in a way that the Emperor was not human. He was the first custodian. He was privy to more of the Emperor's knowledge, plans, and true feelings, and the parts of his master that were kept secret were for a reason. It was not his place, nor in his capacity to question. With the unification of Terra complete, after decades of war, all opponents either destroyed or integrated, work began on the next stage. Constantin was as much administrator as soldier, as plans and foundations were drafted and created for structures designed to encompass a civilization much larger and more powerful than all of Terra's current might combined. The Imperium was stretched to the stars, the dream of mankind, the destination where hope and caution merged. But to Constantin, the Emperor and Malkador, that war required a new breed of soldier, men who could be diplomats as well as warriors, a force rigorous and disciplined enough to survive the dangers of void space, a war that had no place for the brutality, mentality, and genetically unstable Thunder warriors. Constantin had seen numerous times this savagery up close, a brutal force that was just good enough to unite Terra, but not the galaxy. Upon the slopes of Mount Ararat, thousands of Thunder warriors met their end. A glorious last battle would be the truth the history books would remember. A massacre that drew the attention of one of the High Lords of Terra, Grand Provost Marshal Uwoma Kandawire. Something had happened off the books, in the dark. The connotations were frightening. What was Constantin, the Emperor, capable of? And what force was strong enough to eliminate the hulking warriors of Thunder?
I don't much like them either,
Valdor admitted, punching his gauntlet through the helm face of an Imperial guardsman, before rounding an already stricken Thunder warrior.
But they are here, nonetheless. You should, I think, have seen them coming.
Ha! Ushatan snorted, driving his blade through a second angel, and flinging its twitching body aside.
We always knew something was up. He never made us stupid. Or maybe he did. Stupid to have gone along with it for so long.
He was staggering into range now, battering his way towards Valdor with his habitual blunt force doggedness. For all that, the Primarch had taken damage. These angels weren't like the powered armored prey he'd cut down so contemptuously before. Each one had landed a blow before the end. Cumulatively, they would have got him eventually, like wolves dragging down a bear. Not that Valdor would have allowed it to happen that way.
You had no choice,
Valdor said, now fighting his way into the Primarch's presence, spinning imperilously on his heel to dispatch the last of his bodyguards. All around the two principals, the fighting raged unchecked, though the remorseless march of the grey-clad angels was now breaking the back of the enemy counter-advance.
None of us did.
You almost sound like you regret that,
Ushatan said, lumbering right at him, his blade held in that distinctive, rigid, two-handed style.
Don't tell me you're having second thoughts.
Their weapons crashed together for the first time, sword edge grating against spear tip, and the kinetic release flattened a dozen fighters in all directions. Then they were driving savagely into one another, slashing, parrying, hacking, testing.
I regret nothing,
Valdor said, pushing the Thunder Warrior back with a single, spine-jarring thrust.
Only because you can't remember how.
Ushatan laughed, pushing back hard. For all his decrepitude, all his battle damage, he was still a furnace of energy raging against the fading light.
Still, I always wondered what it would be like to fight you.
Valdor smashed a pauldron away, ripping the metal from its shackles and exposing blood-laced flesh. He followed up with a jab that would have taken the Primarch's head off had he not jerked it back at the last moment.
Many people have wondered,
Valdor remarked, battering him back another few paces.
So they tell me.
Ushatan was spitting blood by then, his shoulders dropping. His blade work never let up though, and kept on pressing, kept on blocking.
They're all dead now, I guess.
He spat, trying to shoot another grim smile.
It comes for us all in the end.
Hammering back, putting all his strength into a sudden push that checked the Apollonian spear for a moment and held it locked in a snarling mesh of electric overflow. Their faces came close for the first time, a blank mask of pure gold and a brutish pig iron helm grille.
I always knew you'd outlive us, because I saw what you did to all the others. These angels will fight for you now, but one day they'll realize the truth about you. They'll see you coming for them. Too late to stop it. We're all dispensable. Every one of us that he made for these wars. All but you.
Valdor threw off the deadlock, hacked back at him, piling strength onto strength. He could feel abundance flowing through his sinews, filling him with a familiar cold, martial perfection. Already he could perceive the end to this encounter, its possible outcomes narrowing swiftly now, pitilessly shrinking down to the singularity of another conquest.
I am nothing,
He countered, finding that he uttered the words with more vehemence than he'd intended.
an instrument, to be cast aside when its function is performed.
And what function is that? Do you even know? Or are you just playing along with this, hoping it becomes obvious later on?
Valdor saw the gap then, the weary slip of lactic acid-heavy arms, and pounced, spinning the spear and lancing it dead straight. Ushatan tried to parry and almost got there, but the strike was just too atom perfect, and the blazing spear point crashed through the Primarch's breastplate, shoving him backwards. Ushatan roared, grabbing the hilt of Valdor's weapon and trying to wrench himself free of it, but by now the disrupted charge was spilling across him, tearing up what remained of his battle plate and searing into the skin below. Valdor cast him down, using the spear's leverage to slam him to the snow-piled ground. The impact was shuddering, sending a shockwave dancing across the terrain and snapping Ushatan's spine. Grey-clad angels coolly advanced around them both, past the kill site, driving the last of the Primarch's ragtag army back towards the ridge, leaving burning vehicle shells and freezing corpses in their wake. Valdor extinguished his spear's disruptor and knelt beside his victim. As he did so, he withdrew a long knife from his belt. When Ushatan saw that, he coughed out a final dry laugh.
The mercy stroke, eh?
He rasped, his face transfixed with agony. Up close, the black veins of fermenting poisons were visible on his exposed skin.
Alas, indignity. You always were a miserable bastard.
Valdor placed the tip of the knife over Ushatan's heart. Fresh snow was falling around them, turned brown and flaky by burnt promethium.
I meant what I said. Lord Primarch, I take no pleasure in this. You are one of our finest commanders.
And these new toys of yours, who will lead them now? Will they have their own commanders?
No, those ones are lost.
All the better for you then. The High Lord was right. You can't bear rivals.
It was not my doing.
Sure it wasn't.
Ushatan spasmed, hacking up oily blood.
You know, when we were at Molinsen, and I said I pitied you, I meant it. I'm not trying to goad you. I really do pity you.
Valdor remained motionless. For a moment, his hand was on the grip of the knife.
I lived, Captain General. It was short, and it was painful, but by the 9 hells, I lived. I'd rather have it that way than yours. No joy, no hate, no fear. Unbreakable without growth. Immortal without passion.
As Valdor readied himself to apply downward pressure, he had a sudden vision of a far-off future state, spun out of reality and into the cold halls of an undiscovered time, where the galaxy itself was darkened by strife, and whole worlds were cast into flame, where wonders and madness had been unlocked, and now screamed their way through the arch of reality, where the foundations of physics creaked beneath the ravaging scuttle of nightmarish unreason, and he was still there, still unchanged, still cold and pure, and steadfast, and unable to feel anything but the ubiquitous press of unending responsibility.
What is left for you, Constantin?
Ushatan breathed, blood bubbling up beneath his burned lips.
What more can he take from you that he hasn't already?
Valdor drew in a long breath, and then plunged the knife in, ending the Primarch's agony. For a moment he did nothing else. His head bowed, the storm exhausting itself around him, and coating the land with a film of pale, drifting grey. Then, slowly, he withdrew the blade.
Nothing.
He said, very softly.
Nothing at all.
All our strength, our will, has the power to shape worlds. Yet it is kept in check, restrained by our beliefs, our doubt. Everyone is made up by the events of their past, and it forms walls around one's spirit, or breaks such walls down. The mind makes some powerless and gives strength to others. Because we are not ready to give up our ties or codes, we surrender ourselves. We become slaves to teachings and belief. That is why belief will always rule you. To truly believe in an ideal, you must be willing to betray it, not to follow it so dogmatically. That is the lesson of strength.
Alone, Valdor stood, staring down the remnants of the Thunder Warriors, led by Ushatan and Grand Provost Marshal Wuma Kandawire. In alliance with the geneticist Amar Astarte, they stood against what the Imperium was becoming, fighting for accountability, democracy. They knew that plans had been made, generals to replace the old, ones accountable only to the Emperor, and they had to stop it. Constantin told Kandawire and Ushatan that there were no new generals, but there were new armies. Behind Constantin, silhouetted in the driving muck of the ice storm, where the snow and hail screamed and the frozen earth cracked, 10,000 helm lenses suddenly ignited, then began to advance. The Adeptus Astartes, genetically altered super soldiers, created with the meshing of specialized organs and pumped with stimulants. Faster, stronger, and more disciplined than a mortal man, and yet far more genetically stable than the Thunder Warriors. Armed with the Imperium's finest armors and weapons, this new breed of super soldier was unleashed upon Ushatan and his remaining brothers. The Thunder Warriors were like lions, primal strength, tearing and breaking the wash of Astartes flowing through their ranks, but one by one they were torn down. These new men hunted like wolves, bringing down the larger and stronger beasts in front of them as a group. Constantin, with every slash and stab with his spear, reaped death. His precision and skill were utterly perfect. Perceiving in mid-melee minute drops in speed due to lactic acid build-up, he was moving fast enough that the Thunder Warriors couldn't even register his movements or parries. The gap between Constantin and Ushatan closed. Spear met two-handed sword in a melee so brutal, so mind-numbingly fast, that to bear witness to it, vibrations would cascade through your weak, mortal form. Ushatan taunted Constantin, trying to punch through both his physical and emotional walls, but it was fruitless. I am nothing. Constantin's life, his thoughts, his feelings were utterly unimportant. The two superhumans clashed and struck, fighting at the pinnacle of human martial prowess, but it was not enough for the Primarch of the Thunder Warriors. Constantin rammed his spear through his enemy, driving him to the ground, as the last of the Thunder Warriors were cut down around them. With the snow falling and Ushatan's black blood spilling, he railed against Constantin one last time, telling him, "I pitied you. I meant it. I'm not trying to goad you. I really do pity you. I lived, Captain General. It was short, and it was painful, but by the 9 hells, I lived. I'd rather have it that way than yours. No joy, no hate, no fear. Unbreakable without growth, immortal without passion. What more can he take from you that he hasn't already? The mind makes some powerless, and gives strength to others. Because we are not ready to give up our ties or codes, we surrender ourselves. We become slaves to teachings and belief. That is why belief will always rule you. To truly believe in an ideal, you must be willing to betray it. Constantin, a man with no ego, no passion, it had been purged in the elevation the Emperor had done to him. He was the epitome of control, an emotional state of neutral. Had he ever felt the roar of rage, excitement, or joy in his blood, like Ushatan? Had he ever cried, felt love, or true happiness? How much of his humanity had the Emperor taken? And yet with the one thing he was left with, duty, did he really believe in it? Could he make that choice? Could he, like Awoma Kandawire, choose to believe in the Imperium? Could he, like her, be willing to betray it? Was he a creature of power or strength? Did he ever make any fundamental choices in his own life? Did the Emperor alter him because he feared a rival? One who had the strength to make choices? In the ashes of victory, Constantin reflected on the slain Primarch of the Thunder Warriors. A man he confessed he did like, but the duty remained, and his death was necessary for the future of the Imperium. Awoma Kandawire was left alone, the dreams of a diplomatic Imperium fading with the opposition that could do nothing. The genetic laboratories in Duality had been sabotaged by Amar Astarte, disgusted with how far the Emperor had gone, and was seemingly willing to go. A fruitless scheme, counteracted by the Imperium's own copies of the research and materials. The operation for the production of this army was to be taken from the hundreds to the thousands, to then the hundreds of thousands. Constantin did not like these Astartes. Too much imperfection in them. They were too human. He had been there decades ago, during their creation, when he had borne witness to one of the Imperium's greatest failures. Deep in the Imperium's innermost sanctums, under layers of protection, thought to be so ironclad, lay the new generals, forged for war in the stars, the Primarch Project. 20 specimens, created from the Emperor's own genetic material, were the foundation of an army that would conquer the galaxy, but they were lost. A tear into the warp opened within their gestation chamber, ripping the capsules from their ceramite foundations. Constantin and Amar Astarte had rushed within, recovering as much research and material as they could, with the Emperor of Mankind utilizing his enormous psychic might to hold the collapsing roof. As Constantin and Amar rushed, the loss of these new Primarchs, these generals, was insurmountable. The truth behind their loss was only known to the Emperor, Malcador, and Constantin, a secret kept even from Constantin's custodian brothers. Chaos within the warp, the immaterial, the reflective realm of rippling psychic emotions. Some foul and evil stirred. 4 dark entities, eldritch horrors that called themselves gods. Embodiments of humanity's worst tendencies. Their very existence was only a supportive claim to the idea that humanity must be united together, lest the influence of these foul gods corrupt and warp us. With the trial by fire of the Adeptus Astartes, created from the surviving material of the Primarch Project, Constantin declared that the Imperium was truly born. The palace was now secure. All it needs now is a throne, a symbol, and a weapon. A resource that would guide the Imperium through the warp. A golden throne. With a preparation underway, Constantin heard the news from Malcador that planted a seed of caution. The Emperor of Mankind had felt his Primarch's presence out there in the galaxy. Immediately Constantin's mind went to threat evaluation. What if these Primarchs had been tainted? Could they ever trust these superhumans, raised without the guidance and conditioning of the Imperium? Perhaps they should be destroyed. But most troubling of all, the Emperor had called them his sons. It was like commuting with a star, all-powerful, brilliant, so far above the existence of all others. Constantin knew exactly what the Emperor was, what he had seen, and what he had done, and what he intended to do. But it caught him off guard when this timeless, godlike creature expressed humanity. Sons. They were meant to be weapons. Malcador told Constantin it was not often, but there were periods where the Emperor seemed more connected to his humanity. Something Constantin accepted, but did not understand. But his regimented mind did not have the space to question. Constantin's caution, his distrust would only heighten in the events to come. In an interaction wiped from all Imperial records, Constantin noticed some suspicious activity taking place within the Imperial Palace. He and the custodians were the pinnacle of discipline, exhibiting a caution and concentration so absolute that any threat to the Emperor was met by guardian spear and death. In the Imperium's royal courtyard, the Emperor descended down in a thunderhawk to the surface, but an imperfection, an error was caught, as Garudo had failed to respond. The deeply coded language voxed into silence. Atop an angled roof, overlooking the landing pad, a figure lay in watch, a threat, donned in the custodian's own golden auramite armor. Constantin launched himself at this imposter, Like a golden thunderstorm, his personal Apollonian spear lashing with tongues of lightning. Despite his size, despite the bulk of his armour, he moved as smoothly as a dancer along the narrow ridge. He was the Emperor's greatest champion, Terra's mightiest warrior, and peerless in combat. A duel broke out. The two enormous figures matched each other blow for blow. Something too fast for the mortal eye to see. A contest that was broken apart just as quickly as it had started, as Malcador the Sigillite told them both to stand down. Constantin asked this intruder who he was. The large superhuman responded, "I am Alfarius, one of the Primarchs," donning the armour and personal weapon of his fellow custodian, Garudo. Only Garudo's death would have allowed this Alfarius access to his equipment. Each custodian was a genetic masterpiece, a work of science and art, each one of them the Emperor's finest, who accumulated names as they achieved and accomplished in the Emperor's name. Constantin himself had achieved nearly 2,000 names, each etched onto the inside of his own custodian armour. The loss of Garudo, a loyal servant of the Emperor, was a magnanimous loss, and yet here he stood, Constantin's first interaction with a Primarch, in the armour of a murdered brother. Interrogating this Alfarius, he revealed his purpose for his actions, to expose a weakness in the security of the Imperial Palace, a protection that needed to be impregnable, and any amount of sacrifice in the name of the Emperor's protection was worth spilling, though that did not mean he liked it. Constantin understood that Garudo's death may have been necessary. He accepted it, but he was not devoid of all emotion, and still felt kindred for his custodian brothers. Alfarius went further, saying that Constantin could not think like an enemy of the Emperor. His mind was forged with unbreakable loyalty. He could never choose to betray the Emperor, even in thought. A weakness their enemies could exploit. It would be that weakness, it would be this attitude to war, treating it like a dark game, that led Constantin to develop a way to fortify the palace from threats of that nature, creating the Blood Games, a contest, poising the Emperor's own custodians against each other in a contest to reach the inner sanctums of the palace. The lesson had been important, as well as for the fact that this Primarch, Alfarius, had the potential to think like an enemy, something that only stoked the cautions of Constantin. After centuries of work, origins armoured in steel and leather to brilliant Oromite gold, Constantin stood at the side of the Emperor. Terra had been unified, 20 legions of the Adeptus Astartes created, and an alliance with the Mechanicum of Mars. The vision was coming to fruition. The Emperor of Mankind declared the birth of the Great Crusade. Enormous armadas launched from Terra, venturing into the cold void of space to conquer the galaxy. At the Emperor's side, Constantin began to battle upon countless worlds, facing horrifying Xenos and non-compliant colonies of mankind. Like ink in water, the boundaries of the Imperium spread, a die cast over millions, and then billions upon billions. And then, after a decade of war, upon the world of Chthoniya, a crime-ridden underhive, they found him. Horus Lupercal, number 16, a Primarch. A reunion that became a rally cry to the Imperium, as the first openly acknowledged Primarch had been found. With the Primarch reunited with his legion, his sons, Constantin finally began to understand why the Emperor had forged such terrifying beings. Worlds collapsed under the onslaught of a genius Primarch-like mind. the effect they had on others. To be in their very presence made people weep. As the decades rolled past, more and more of them were found, treated like long-lost sons. There were some he respected, one such as Rogal Dorn, who in their first duel together, Constantin emerged victorious. Centuries of skill paired against the innate strength and speed of a Primarch, but never again did Dorn lose. These creatures learned fast. As the Imperium spread further and further across the galaxy, the Imperium of mankind grew, transforming Terra into a bustling administration hub, something that over time drew more of the attention of Constantin, as the Primarchs and their legions spread out, conquering, leaving the cleanup and the real compliance to others. Decades upon decades of war, Constantin and the Custodians fought alongside their Emperor in achieving compliance across the galaxy. The dream, the grand vision at the Imperium's heart, was within grasp. The Emperor decided that the Great Crusade was stable, and the next great work upon Terra would begin. On the world of Ullanor, cleansed the filthy Xenos, the Orcs, a grand triumph was prepared. Billions of Astra Militarum regiments, numerous Astartes legions, and their Primarchs stood in parade. Constantin stood at the side of the Emperor as billions wept at the majesty of such a perfect being. Constantin saw his king, that his attention was required upon Terra, and that there would be a new head of the Great Crusade, the War Master Horus Lupercal, the 16th, the first found and favoured son. A new era had begun, with Constantin following his emperor back to the throne world, the place of his birth and his transformation. Inside the innermost sanctums of the Imperial Palace, deep below the incredible technological masterpiece that was the Golden Throne, the work escalated, crafted in a time lost to history by a species long forgotten. A shimmering, disorientating, vertigo-inducing tear into another realm was open. The Webway, the mirror dimension highway, the grand plan, the future of the species lie ahead. But fate is never so kind. Valdor was among them, his long cloak whipping in the ash-blown wind. More than 60 custodians of the Legio, plus hundreds of support troops and regular auxiliary units, were gathering for the push north. The Captain General looked almost untouched by combat. His armour was close to pristine, giving off a reflective aura under Prospero's blackening skies. His Apollonian spear seethed with energy, wrapping the golden shaft in a corona of false sunlight. He moved in the way he always did before battle, proud, confident, measured. Simonis bowed as he drew close.
Grim labor, Vestarios,
Valdor said.
Indeed, Lord. Now that I see this place.
He had been intending to say that he wished to see it utterly destroyed. He had seen sorcery of a scale and depravity he had never witnessed before, but he never got the chance. The Land Raider jutted in close, gunmetal grey, adorned with blood-red decorations of writhing serpents. It was the first of more than 20 such troop carriers, driven insanely fast through the rubble and kicking it up like a ship throws a bow wave. For a moment, Simonis never even saw Leman Russ. He had certain expectations of Primarchs, that they marched on foot at the head of their armies, issuing orders in clear voices like his own master. He did not expect them to ride into war. Hanging off the back of a personal transport one-handed and swinging a damned sword around like a berserk.
Constantin!
Russ cried out, throwing himself from the still racing Land Raider and crunching heavily to the ground. His blade, the one Imperial scholars called Bile Knight, but one which the walls themselves called Mjolnir, gleamed with malignant silver-white spitefulness. The Wolf King marched up to the Captain General, pelt swinging about him. Other warriors jumped down from the skidding land raiders, Varangiar Terminators bearing axes and frost blades. Their liberally bloodied armor hung with fur scraps and bone totems. Valdor waited for him, flanked by his own honor guard. The custodians were taller than their counterparts, and no doubt more accomplished in some of the finer arts of combat. But there was something in the Varangiar's latent menace, bleeding from them with every swaggered move, that chilled the blood.
What took you so damn long?
Russ demanded, hawking up a gobbet of spittle and loosing it on the ground. He went helmetless, the only one of them there who did. A statement of arrogant confidence that struck Simonus as borderline crazed.
We've been killing witches without your sisters to blunt their fangs.
Valdor stiffened a little.
It was your wish to engage first, Lord,
he said.
True.
Russ laughed. There was a strange light in those bestial eyes. Simonus thought he looked half mad.
True. But you took your time when the order came.
Order. No living man gave the Captain General an order, save the one who had created him.
Our landings are completed,
Valdor said calmly.
We advance on all fronts, and the Knight Commander's sisterhoods are deploying throughout the city.
Russ growled low in his throat, a sound that made Simonus' spine tingle.
This will throttle them now. This will crush them. Hell's eyes, I have learned to hate these bastards, but still he eludes me.
Is he even on this world?
Asked Valdor doubtfully.
We have detected nothing.
Russ drew up to Valdor then. He was a little shorter, much broader, his armor stained and smeared where Valdor's was pristine.
Oh, yes,
he hissed, smiling in a disconcertingly feral manner.
I can smell him now. I can smell him hunkering down in his own filth, fearful of me.
Valdor remained unmoved.
Even now, I would see him taken to Terra if it could be done. I would wish to know why.
Russ laughed, a coarse bark that sent more spittles flying into Valdor's faceplate.
You're still clinging to that? Ha!
He turned away, swinging his great blade casually.
I've known since I first saw this world that we would face one another. I did not come here for prisoners, Constantin. If my father had truly wished for such, he would not have sent me.
You were not sent alone, Lord Russ.
Russ glanced back at Valdor, a sly smile on his fanged face.
Oh, that's it, is it?
He laughed again.
You have the power of magisterium and wish to cling to it.
Russ paced back to him again. He was always moving, restless, like a tempest bound up inside the sham form of a man.
Don't try to invoke the Lex with me. You claim to speak to my father, but you're not his blood, are you? Not like we are. That's what really gets you, isn't it? You're his instruments. He'd toss you aside in an instant if he cared to. We, though, we're family.
Russ gave out a great belly laugh then, amused by the idea.
You'll never understand that.
Valdor didn't reply for an instant, seemingly genuinely nonplussed.
There are so many errors there,
he said eventually.
I don't even know where to start.
But a reply never came. Fresh mortar blasts boomed at the end of the avenue. The land raiders gunned their smoggy engines, and the grav tanks swung round to target new markers. In the far distance, where one of the many great pyramids slumped in burning ruin, and the clouds deepened towards inky vortex, the enemy was moving.
They stir!
Russ roared joyously, running back to the land raider and leaping onto its chassis. The walls were crying out battle chants, slamming their blades against their armor and slavering for action once more.
Try to keep up, Constantin! You'll have to get your armor dirty sooner or later!
And then the column powered up, and thundered down the shattered avenue, followed by looping packs of grey hunters and whole contingents of bound auxilia. Simonas watched them go. The Aculon guard remained static around them, their helm faces magnificently blank.
Is he in his right mind, Lord?
He ventured, looking up at Valdor inquiringly. Valdor didn't respond immediately. He watched the wolves race into battle, whooping and hollering. It was impossible to gauge what he thought behind that ornate mask of Auramite and Cerulean.
Trademarks,
He said, finally, a single, withering expletive that sounded as close to a curse as the Captain General of the 10,000 would ever get.
He has unleashed something he does not understand,
Valdor said, staring at the distant Russ and speaking slowly and deliberately.
just as Magnus did before him. What is it with them all? Where did they get this monstrous pride?
More flagstones cracked, and Simonas heard the sighing creak of breaking stone. There was no sign of the Primarch, of the Thousand Suns now, only the endless bellows of his assassin. He lurched over to Valdor across the tilting flags, daring to reach out to pull him back from the edge, but at last, the Captain General turned away, as the debris of a world's demise blew about them in a furious eddysis. He finally reached up to remove his helm. It came loose with a hiss, and Valdor inhaled the first unfiltered air of doomed Prospero. The Captain General was furious. Never before had Simonas witnessed such raw anger on that normally implacable face.
They are the architects of this,
Valdor said, speaking to the storm.
all of them.
He turned to look at his thrall.
It could have been prevented. Yet when the hour came, we merely watched them being born.
2 centuries of war. The Great Crusade had expanded far, and now the Imperium encompassed billions upon billions of humans. But a rift had begun to form, a festering wound that had finally spilled into a question, a decision that needed the approval of only the Emperor. The use of psychic powers within the Legiones Astartes. 2 sides had been drawn up. The pro-Psychers, Magnus the Red, Sanguinius, and Jegatai Khan, versus the anti-Psychers, Lehman Russ and Mortarion, and in part, Corvus Corax and Rogal Dorn, others refusing to take a side. The grand debate for the future of those who manipulated the powers of the warp was overseen by the most powerful user of that art, the Emperor of Mankind, and at his side stood Constantin Valdor, no judge, but a loyal guardian. Constantin himself did not feel strongly for either side. He had seen the misuse and danger of this power during the Unification Wars, against the vile, self-declared priest-king Mollard Sen. The connection to the warp, that realm of madness, left him cautious of the influence of the great enemy, the gods of chaos, that had ripped the Primarchs from the palace centuries ago. And yet his lord, his king, was a Psyker. Constantin had seen his emperor wield his abilities for the good of the Imperium. He knew the value of astropaths and navigators, whose existence and powers were vital to the survival of the Imperium, keeping an empire's logistics alive with their very connection to the warp. The Council of Nicaea had begun, each side presenting their case with passion, but all turned into disaster with the revelation of the Primarch Magnus's hubris. He had delved too far. He and his legion were unstable, burned like a hand too close to the flame, as they were walking the path of those who had brought about the horrors of Old Night, the age of collapse from mankind, whose scars were felt upon every world in the galaxy, a time of rampant, uncontrolled psychic nightmare. Constantin saw the matter put to a close, as the Emperor declared the banning of psychic powers within the Astartes legions, a decision whose consequences would ripple across the galaxy. With Constantin and the Emperor returning back to Terra, the great work continued. The webway portal beneath Terra had been opened, its winding routes conquered and claimed under the banner of the Imperium. It was an alien place, its shifting, misty walls, its acrid smell, and the echoes of ghosts haunting the shadows and periphery of eyesight. Constantin, alongside the Custodes and members of the Adeptus Mechanicus, quickly garrisoned a long-ruined Eldari city, its inhabitants long dead to an age almost lost to time. But this seeming path of victory turns to ash in the Imperium's mouth, as after years of building these foundations, it all came tumbling down. At the side of his Emperor, Constantin saw this figure of raw, hot psychic flame burst through the webway, all the way to the steps of the Golden Throne itself. The psychic wards the Emperor himself had placed shattered. The figure with one baleful eye exhibited a startling panic as Constantin and his brothers began to fire upon it, their shells passing through the apparition. The palace began to shake, and equipment exploded, taking an untold number of lives. The figure in psychic fire looked to the Emperor, and in those eyes that had seen countless suns and civilizations die, he answered him, Magnus. The panicked, miserable Primarch answered, Father. Behind the projection of Magnus, a tide of laughing, unholy, vile sounds rushed like a tide. Constantin, the Custodes and the Emperor charged the demons. Magnus's breaking of the psychic wards of the Emperor had doomed Terra. The webway was under assault, and the Imperium tried to flood in. Only stabilized by the Emperor's might, Magnus had broken the Edict of Nicaea, but most importantly he had broken the dream for the species. The Emperor, for all of Constantin's life, had remained controlled, his displays of humanity waxing and waning over periods we would call lifetimes, but his fury was obvious. The censure of Magnus was ordered immediately, and a contingent of Custodes and Sisters of Silence led by Constantin were sent to aid the Space Wolves Legion, the Thousand Sons' rivals, in the seizure of Magnus, to stand trial upon Terra. Arriving within the Prosperine system, Constantin was united with the Primarch Leman Russ. The enormous figure drew up close, boisterous and lively, just like how he had been when the two had met near 2 centuries ago. If Constantin was the warrior carved in marble, unmoving and stoic, Leman Russ was the animated, living thing that drew all eyes upon him. Leman and Constantin, both weapons forged by the Emperor's personal hand, yet where one exemplified order, the other was freedom. Constantin, despite his cautions, liked the Wolf King, even if at times their natures mixed like oil and water. You claim to speak for my father, but you are not his blood, are you? Not like we are. That's what really gets you, isn't it? You're his instruments. He'd toss you aside in an instant if he cared to. We though, we're family. Constantin was an instrument, something he had told Ushatan long ago. He was to be cast aside when he was no longer needed, but the idea that Leman and all of his brothers believed themselves to be family, with a man so far above mortal connections, puzzled him. Was this part of the Emperor's manipulation, a way to keep his tools loyal, or a display of his rare humanity slipping through? Constantin was bonded to Leman Russ in a way he was not with the other Primarchs. The Apollonian spear, one of a pair alongside the Dionysian spear, gifted to Russ, both forged by the Emperor's hand in the Age of Strife. The Apollonian spear was gifted to Constantin at his ascension to the role of chief custodian. Each foe struck down by the blade, their very soul, their core being would flash through Constantin's mind in an instant. Each conflict, where thousands upon thousands died at his hand, he left feeling like he knew every one of them. Kojazu, Ushatan, corrupted Terran zealots, Xenos, all laid bare before him. It was a gift from his lord, an augury into other lives that kept the threads of his own humanity together. He was a man. Despite his transformation, his humanity was too precious to lose to indifference. As the forces of the Imperium were set to loose themselves upon the Thousand Suns, new orders had come in from the War Master. The judgment had been changed to annihilation. The planet burned, and the wolves of Fenris roared. As the Custodes marched, billions of lives were lost, and each Thousand Sun, such as Phocis Takar, Constantin cut down, he saw their treachery, their gene flaws. He saw them become monsters in his own mind, mutated beyond recognition. 30 Astarte stood against him, each gifted with prescience, but still they fell single-handedly to the unbelievable strength of Constantin. The hubris of Magnus had brought him here, and at the moment of victory, the Wolf King victorious in his duel with the Crimson King, they vanished. The Thousand Suns were gone, and in the ashes of a world on fire, amongst the failures and hubris of another Primarch, Constantin came the closest in his entire life to anger. They are the architects of this, their monstrous pride. It could have been prevented, yet when the hour came, we merely watched them being born.
Men ought either to be indulged or utterly destroyed, for if you merely offend them, they take vengeance. But if you injure them greatly, they are unable to retaliate, so that the injury done to a man ought to be such that vengeance cannot be feared.
The Battle of Prospero had ended in disaster. Their objective failed. Returning back to Terra, Constantin heard the news that would change the fate of the Imperium forever. The War Master Horus has declared open rebellion. Alongside the Emperor's children, Death Guard, and World Eater legions, open rebellion was now alive, and like a malicious disease that would wash across the various worlds of the Imperium. Constantin confided in his fellow custodian. He had been there when Horus Lupercal had been discovered by the Emperor. He had watched him, seen him learn and grow into command of his legion. He had seen him be crowned War Master at the triumph of Ulanor. He knew the hidden pride that lay beneath the humble mask. He pondered on the idea of a building resentment fostered outside of the Emperor's influence, but it did not add up. It was not enough to fuel a rebellion. Perhaps something had driven him to it. The Imperium was in shock. Lines were being drawn up, and sides chosen. The realization of Horus's betrayal had called into question the burning of Prospero. Billions had died, and a legion had been destroyed on the false orders of the War Master Horus. Constantin had seen their corruption, their genetic faults rupture through the Thousand Suns as they delved too deeply into their psychic powers. But the fact that their destruction was architected by a traitor pained Constantin. With the return of the Primarch Rogal Dorn to Terra, preparations for defense and retribution was enacted. With much of the Emperor's attention drawn to the webway, under assault, underneath the Imperial Palace, the war in the material was left to Dorn and Constantin. 7 legions were sent to bring these traitors to heel, to rip them out of their hole on the world of Istvan V. Constantin had always been cautious of the Legiones Astartes. He found those feelings more and more reinforced when the further disastrous news reached the throne world. The Night Lords, Iron Warriors, Word Bearers, and Alpha Legion had turned upon their allies. 3 loyalist legions had been decimated, their Primarchs missing. The Battle of Istvan V, one of the bloodiest, most mind-numbing, cacophonous battles sent the Imperium into disarray. Constantin and Dorn began to lock down Terra and the Sol system, preparing for the battle now that would inevitably come to their doorstep. Constantin knew the capabilities of Horus. His first meeting with a Primarch, Alpharius of the Alpha Legion, had taught him a lesson. He needed to put himself within a traitor's mind, to understand them, to understand how to fight like them. Terror, already under the watchful gaze of the custodians, blurred the line into a surveillance state. The probability of spies for the War Master lurked in the shadows. Many people and worlds had been forcibly complied into the Imperium sphere, and there were plenty who had no love for the Emperor. The galaxy began to burn, as the traitorous forces began to spread out like dark fingers, shadowing worlds under their vile grasp. The Imperium was falling apart, as various warp storms began to cut off whole sectors, making communication impossible. It was becoming clear that there was something more to this rebellion. Just as Constantin had suspected, there was a dark benefactor to the War Master's actions. Whispers of vile rituals, human sacrifice, creatures of nightmare that did not seem like Xenos. The great enemy, the gods of chaos. The secret known only to the triumvirate of the Emperor, Malcador the Sigillite and Constantin Valdor. But now the secret was out, and the fury of many such as Dorn was ferocious. To be kept in the dark against such dangers, they had prosecuted a war, the Great Crusade, in the name of the Imperial truth, bringing humanity across the stars out of the darkness, away from the ignorance of mysticism and the enslavement to belief. And yet there were creatures in the warp, entities that called themselves gods, creatures that answered the prayers of the desperate and cruel. The truth had become evident to the Emperor, Malcador and Constantin, that this was a war for the species, for its very soul, a war against enemies that would use every foul trick in the book. Constantin began to take the steps necessary to fight that war. Within a dark corner on Terra, Constantin, draped in robes and hiding his identity, made his way into one of the Imperium's most inner sanctums. There he met with perhaps the most dangerous men and women within the Imperium, the Officio Assassinorum, chemically and genetically altered killers, crafted and armed with technology beyond the reach of most within the Imperium. An order who had operated directly under the Emperor, a necessary tool, for some enemies could not be reasoned with. Appearing before the Assassinorum Council, it was Constantin who became the architect of a plan to deal with their enemy, a united task force from all sub-schools of the Order, working in tandem on one target: Horus Lupercal. Men ought either to be indulged or utterly destroyed, for if you merely offend them, they take vengeance, but if you injure them greatly, that they are unable to retaliate, so that the injury done to a man ought to be such that vengeance cannot be feared. Horus needed to die, Emperor's son or not. He was a threat to his master. What some would consider cowardly, others might call expedient. Constantin's movements had not gone unnoticed by the Praetorian of Terra, Primarch Rogal Dorn. He confronted him, clearly disturbed by the secrecy and the implication of this hidden order's use. Constantin deflected and lied. He was used to the lies. He had hidden truths from Candlewire, just like now he was lying to Dorn. Lies did not offend him, because he trusted that if he was not told, then he did not need to know. An utter acceptance that bristled against Dorn, who was preparing a mighty defense against forces he was told was a lie. The protection of the Emperor was Constantin's goal, and he would employ any method. He would utterly destroy his master's enemies, so that the consequences done ought to be such that vengeance could not be feared. Dorn pushed back against Constantin that your first remit is to safeguard the life of the Emperor of mankind above all else. Mine, and that of my brothers, is to safeguard the Imperium. Constantin responded that the two are the same. To Constantin, the Imperium was the Emperor, the singular vision at its heart. He could not imagine an existence without him. Did he fight for the man or the dream? Was he even capable of defending humanity from the Emperor? Which would he let die first? The species or the master? The tension between these two demigod-like figures never went away, as Dorn left with a distasteful feeling. Any feelings of shame, any wavering of morality that would run through our minds never entered the rigid, egoless temple of Constantin, as he left Terra in preparation for the assassination of the traitor, Horus Lupercal.
Would you?
Dorn's fury was palpable, crackling in the air around him.
I'm sure my father is capable of defending himself. And tell me, Captain General, what kind of victory exists in a war like the one you would have us fight?
He gestured at the room around them.
A war fought from hidden places, under cover of falsehood. Innocent lives wasted in the name of dubious tactics. Underhanded, clandestine conflicts fueled by secrets and lies.
For a moment, Valdor half expected the Imperial fist to rip up the table between them, just so he could strike at the custodian. But then, like a tidal wave drawing back into the ocean, Dorn's anger seemed to subside. Valdor knew better, though the Primarch was the master of his own fury, turning it inward, turning it to stony, unbreakable purpose.
This war,
Dorn went on, sparing Malcador a glance,
is a fight not just for the material, for the worlds and for the hearts of men. We are in a battle for ideals. At stake are the very best of the Imperium's ultimate principles. Values of pride, nobility, honor, and fealty. How can a veiled killer understand the meaning of such words?
Valdor felt Malcador's eyes on him, and the tension in him seemed to dissipate. At once, he felt a cold sensation of conviction rise in his thoughts, and he matched the Imperial Fist's gaze, answering his challenge.
No one in this room has known war as intimately as you have, my lord. And so surely it is you who must understand better than any one of us that this war cannot be a clean and gallant one. We fight a battle like no other in human history. We fight for the future. Can you imagine what might have come to pass if Kel and the rest of the execution force had not been present on Dagonet? If this creature's spear had been reunited with the rebel forces?
He would have attempted to complete his mission. Come to Terra to enter the sphere of the Emperor's power and engage his murder gift,
said Sire Calexis.
He would never have got that far,
insisted Sir Vanus.
He would have been found and killed, surely. The Sigillite or the Emperor himself would have sensed such an abomination and crushed it.
Are you certain?
Valdor pressed.
Horus has many allies, some of them closer than we wish to admit. If this spear could have reached Terra, made his attack, even a failure to make the kill, a wounding even,
He trailed off, suddenly appalled by the grim possibility he was describing.
Such a psychic attack would have caused incredible destruction.
Dorn said nothing for a moment. It seemed as if the Primarch was sharing the same terrible nightmare that danced in the Custodian's thoughts, of his liege lord, mortally wounded by a lethal enemy, clinging to fading life, whilst the Imperial Palace was a raging inferno all around him. Valdor found his voice once more.
Your brother will beat us, Lord Dorn. He will win this war unless we match him blow for blow. We must not be afraid to make the difficult choices, the hardest decisions. Horus Lupercal will not hesitate to—
I am not Horus.
Dorn snarled, the words striking the Custodian like a physical blow.
And I will.
Enough.
The single utterance was a lightning bolt captured in a crystal, shattering everything around it, silencing them all with an unstoppable, immeasurable force of will. Rogal turned to the sound of that voice, as every man, woman and Astartes in the chamber sank to their knees, each of them instinctively knowing who had uttered it. The Sigillite was the last to do so, shooting a final, unreadable look at the Primarch of the Imperial Fists, before he too took to a show of obedience. The question escaped Dorn's lips.
Father?
The darkness, the great curtains of shadow that had filled the furthest corners of the chamber, now became lighter, the walls and floor growing more distinct by the moment, as the unnatural gloom faded. He blinked. Strange how he had looked directly into that place and seen it, but without really seeing it at all. It had been in plain sight for everyone in the room, even he, and yet none of them had registered the strangeness of it. Now from the black came light. A figure stood there, effortlessly dominating the space, his patrician features marred by a mix of turbulent emotions that gave even the mightiest Imperial Fist a second pause. The Emperor of Mankind wore no armor, no finery or dress uniform, only a simple surplice of grey cloth, threaded with subtle lines of purple and gold silk, and yet he was still magnificent to behold. Perhaps he had been listening to them all along. Yet it seemed to be a defiance of the laws of nature that a being so majestic, so lit with power, could stand in a room among men, Astartes and the greatest mortal psyche would ever live, and be as a ghost. But then he was the Emperor, and to all questions that was sufficient answer. His father came towards him, and Rogal bowed deeply, at length, joining the others that had bended the knee before the master of mankind. The Emperor did not speak. Instead, he strode across the shrouds to the tall windows, where the sailcloth drapes hung like frozen cataracts of shadow. With a flick of his great hands, Dorn's father took a fist of the cloth and snatched it away. The hanging tore free and tumbled to the floor. He walked the perimeter of the room, ripping away every last cover until the chamber was flooded with the bright, honey-yellow luminosity of the Himalayan dawn. Dorn dared to glance up and saw the golden radiance striking his father. It gathered its brightness to him, as if it were an embrace. For an instant, the sunlight was like a sheath of glowing armor about him. Then the Primarch blinked, and the moment passed.
No more shadows,
said the Emperor. His words were gentle, summoning, and all the faces in the room turned to look upon him. He placed a hand on Dorn's shoulder as he passed him by, and then repeated the gesture with Valdor.
No more veils.
He beckoned them all to stand, and as one they obeyed, and yet in his presence, each of them felt as if they were still at his feet. His aura towered over them, filling the emotions of the room. Dorn received a nod, as did Valdor.
My noble son, my loyal guardian, I hear both your words, and I know that there is right in each of you. We cannot lose sight of what we are and what we aspire to be. But we cannot forget that we face the greatest enemy and the darkest challenge.
In the depths of his father's eyes, Dorn saw something no one else could have perceived. So transient and fleeting, it barely registered. He saw sorrow, deep and unending, and his heart ate with an empathy only a son could know. The Emperor reached out a hand and gestured towards the dawn as it rose to fill the room around them.
It is time to bring you into the light. The Officio Assassinorum has been my quiet blade for too long, an open secret none dared to speak of, but no longer. Such a weapon cannot exist forever in the shadows, answerable to no one. It must be seen to be governed. There must be no doubt of the integrity behind every deed, every blow landed, every choice made, or else we count for naught.
His gaze turned to Dorn, and he nodded slowly to his son.
Because of this, I am certain, in the war to come, every weapon in the arsenal of the Imperium will be called to bear. They think of that as the exercise of power. I do not blame them. They are creatures of power, built to dominate, but they are wrong. The term is older than that. It is the interpretation of the truth discovered through communion with the source. We are interpreters of it, not masters. We are slaves to it. That is our first lesson. All others are secondary.
All other attempts had failed, intervened, and halted by the vile first chaplain of the word bearers, Erebus. His dark patrons had whispered things into his ear, leading each Imperial assassin to find themselves slain, even by their own tools. Assembling a team of the most deadly creatures that defied the confines of the word human, Constantin led them to their target destination on Dagonet, the mission taking some of them to the darkest and most rotten places upon this world. Constantin even finding his ship shot down by a bunch of junk hunters, unarmored, staring down at the end of a barrel. However, he noticed something off in the distance, and with a voice that rumbled from the core of an enormous being, he declared, "My name is Constantin Valdor, Captain General of the Legio Custodes, and I hold the power of the Emperor's displeasure in my hand." Death was handed out at the fingertips of Constantin's hand, the miscreants exploding into mist and meat at the hands of horrifying assassins. The plan continued. The target was in sight. Stepping down from the land speeder, they struck, eliminating him, only to find themselves duped. A body double. The plan had failed in regards to except one detail. Spear. A nightmarish creature, a horrific melding of a psychic blank and the corruption of chaos. One drop of the Emperor's blood was the ingredient needed for an assassination, plotted by the vile first chaplain, Erebus. Horus lived, but the anomalous threat was expunged in the attempted regicide. Upon Terra, Constantin met with the ruling Assassinorum Council. The disapproval of Rogal Dorn was apparent. This way of war was dishonorable, a sin on the Imperium that they were fighting for. But Constantin felt justified. The tactics were dishonorable, but what value did the idea of honor have on a man who had the feelings of ego purged from him? The gambit had failed, but the value of the death of this spear was immeasurable. It had protected the Emperor. The very idea of their master's death was a sobering moment for all at the table. Your brother will beat us, Lord Dorn. He will win this war unless we match him blow for blow. We cannot. We must not be afraid to make the difficult choices, the hardest decisions. Horus Lupercal will not hesitate. A mindset so at odds with the noble Dorn, it enraged him. The clashing of Constantin, the enslaved weapon, versus the Primarch who had made a choice to serve the Emperor. But before the argument could escalate, a booming voice silenced them all. The Emperor, the brilliant, perfect being, spoke. My noble son, my loyal guardian, I hear both your words, and I know that there is right in each of you. We cannot lose sight of what we are, and what we aspire to be, but we cannot forget what we face. The greatest enemy and the darkest challenge. The two polar opposites were merged. The cold, calculating of Constantin, combined with the honor of Dorn, as the Emperor brought the Assassinorum into the light. A new, accountable force, a sentiment Constantin immediately accepted, even if he did not understand. The years began to drag on, as the Imperium burned under the assault of Horus, and the traitorous Primarchs and their legions, each of them slowly devouring and succumbing to the corruption of their dark patrons. More and more Primarchs managed to limp back to Terra, each scarred by losses against the traitors. Leman Russ, Sanguinius, and most surprisingly, Jagatai Khan, a legion's loyalty who even Constantin and Dorn had held in doubt. Terra itself was almost unrecognizable, transformed into a bastion that would give pause to any force in the galaxy. Constantin saw the great towers, where he and the first custodians had sat with the Emperor, basking in his personal tutelage, places where they had once discussed philosophy and tactics, the birthplace of the Magisterium, the Order of the Adeptus Custodes, the place where the dream had started and now were destined to be awash with smoke, fire and blood. All roads led to Terra. Both loyalists and traitors knew this, and after over 7 years of civil strife, the War Master was preparing for this final strike. All able-bodied defenders were drawn up, ready to fight on the walls of this great bastion, except one, Leman Russ, Primarch of the Space Wolves. He had prepared his own gambit, a surprise strike designed to cut the head of the traitor's cause before they entered the Sol system. Constantin, Malcador and the other Primarchs knew that there was no swaying him. Constantin met with Russ before his departure, noting the hypocrisy of Russ, with rune priests within his ranks. To Constantin, the ruling of the Emperor was absolute, and this break in the Edict of Nicaea was unlawful, despite Russ's protest that they needed to fight fire with fire. They think that as an exercise of power. I do not blame them. They are creatures of power, built to dominate, but they are wrong. The term is older than that. It is the interpretation of the truth, discovered through communion with the source. We are interpreters of it, not masters. We are slaves to it. That is our first lesson. All others are secondary. To Constantin, any method was allowed within the confines of the Emperor's will, the source. He could not make a choice to betray that will. He was a slave to it. He could not enforce any opinion on it, as the psycho-conditioning of his mind snapped his king's will into his own moral confines. The Primarchs, the creatures of power, struggled against those very confines, their own truths struggling to mix with Constantin's absolute. The Emperor, the Magisterium. He warned Russ that Horus would not fall for his barbarian persona. Constantin knew the brilliant mind that lay beneath. He disliked the Primarchs. They were the cause of all of this, but a part of him liked the Wolf King. Constantin presented Russ with the reason he had come to him: the Dionysian spear, the other half of Constantin's own Apollonian spear, a weapon that had remained firmly locked with Constantin's grasp for centuries, whereas his counterpart had done everything he could to be rid of his. As Constantin departed, Russ told him that he had to do this. It was his nature, something Constantin understood well. For reasons a mystery to him, the Emperor had made them this way. With the departure of the Wolves, the fortification of Terra continued. Constantin took his role upon the War Council, as his brothers continued their battle inside the breached webway underneath the palace. The power of chaos had been growing, the assault and tide of demons putting more pressure on the Emperor's enormous psychic might. The 10,000, the mightiest warriors of the Emperor, were being pushed back, their numbers whittled down as they faced the horrors of sentient nightmare. Each custodian who fell was a loss of unbearable proportions, each a handcrafted human by the Emperor, many with hundreds or thousands of earned names, a loss on the mind of Constantin as the shadow of Horus began to loom overhead.
You refused our offer of assistance,
said Dorn.
We refused nothing,
said Valdor.
You know where the order came from.
And you never resisted it.
Of course not.
Valdor drew in a weary breath.
Resisting orders has not given spectacular results thus far, has it?
Neither has following them,
said Dorn grimly. The tension between the two figures was evident. Despite the informal setting, the Primarch Rogal Dorn was unarmored, as he preferred to be unless called to war. As ever, his aspect was Spartan, clad in robes of a warrior monk. His white hair had grown long, adding to the effect. The many stone tables of his private chambers were stuffed with the paraphernalia of Imperial bureaucracy, order capsules, tactical reports, innumerable requests for audience or support. Even though the doors were closed and locked, Simonis guessed that dozens of attendants still hovered on the far side, waiting for their moment to run the gauntlet of the Lord Commander's unpredictable mood. For now, though, it was only the three of them, locked away in the windowless heart of Dorn's cell-like sanctum, raking over old regrets before the storm hit.
There are days when I think nothing any of us do is free of the curse.
Curse? I did not have you as a suspicious soul.
I wasn't. We're all having to learn new things.
Dorn sat back in his heavy throne, for a moment, letting the aura of control slip. He looked like some archaic warlord then, holed up in his crumbling citadel. As the tides of ruin lapped closer, Simonis tried not to meet his gaze.
The situation remains the same,
Valdor said, steering the discussion back to its purpose.
The Emperor holds the breach under the palace. The Mechanicum works on a way to release him from his duty. But you and I both know they will not succeed in the time we have left to us.
But it's not the same, though, is it? You should have withdrawn earlier. Tell me, Constantin, what did you gain clinging on down there for so long? You'd all rather have died following a command than countermand it.
I do not see that.
It was a fool's errand. I tried to warn you. Unless we committed everything we had, there was no hope of holding those portals. But no, only the pure could be risked. And look how that turned out.
The order was given.
Dorn smiled, cynically and without warmth.
You see, there's your old problem. You never see any fault in him. You never push back. You never stop, think, say to yourself, is that sensible?
He pressed his great, calloused hands together.
And now you have this conundrum, the greatest of your existence. You were created to be the embodiment of his will, but we can no longer discover what that is. You are his voice, but he is silent. Can you think for yourself now, Captain General? That is what is required.
Simonas hardly dared to look at Valdor. No one, not even Russ, who was as much bluster as substance, had ever dared to speak with such casual condescension to his master. And yet, when he finally lifted his eyes to that noble countenance, there was no anger there, only a kind of thoughtfulness.
We were faithful.
Valdor said quietly.
I watched while your brotherhood was created. I studied you. I saw the dangers in you from the start, and witnessed the way you fought and acted and quarreled. And still, I said nothing. If there had been a time to question an order, perhaps it was then. But the moment passed, and your great success came soon afterward. I will be honest now, for you have been honest with me. I did not believe you would ever be that deadly. I saw how swiftly you conquered worlds and said to myself, perhaps this is why you were made in the way you were. That was your great victory. You became untouchable.
Dorn listened warily. Simonas did also.
But now, we see the errors implicit in your forging. I should have spoken earlier. By the time war came to this place, the moment had passed, and we were all trapped by our fates. You say that the defense of the tunnels was doomed? Perhaps so. I have fought in other wars more than you will ever know that were also doomed, and they always played some part in his pattern. I still cleave to that. The only element that could not be accounted for,
and there he looked directly at Dorn,
was you.
Dorn lost his chilly smile.
And, as always, the fault lies elsewhere. From the first time I met you, Constantin, you were never quite able to keep the disdain from tainting your words. Oh, you've been polite. I've never met a more courteous soul. But that doesn't really cut much with me.
The Primarch stirred himself, sitting forwards in the throne and jabbing a finger at the Captain General.
See, for all you look down on us, at least we were doing. We were building the Empire, while you were musing over the finer points of the law that binds you. We were making decisions over which planets would burn and which would be saved. I'd rather have blood on my hands than book ink.
For a moment, Simonas thought Valdor might snap then, release the anger that he was surely capable of. Over heartbeats, the two of them held one another's gaze, as if engaged in some hidden test of will.
And yet, the task remains before us,
Valdor said at last.
I came to confer, not to dispute. We know Lupercal will be here soon. You are the Lord Commander. I have invested in me the power of Magisterium. We must speak with one voice from now on, lest further division hamper what preparation remains.
Dorn looked at the floor then, pressing his fingers together in an image of contemplation. Simonas saw the curve of those mighty shoulders and had a mental image of the weight of the entire Imperium bearing down on them.
I speak as my soul dictates,
Dorn said slowly.
If it appears blunt to you, then it is not intended as such. I do not have time for much else. Only truth now.
He lifted up his eyes, which were ringed from a lack of sleep.
And this is the truth. Your power was exhausted in that war. You have fewer than 1,000 warriors under arms, and half of them are beneath the apothecary's knife. My father is silent and cannot guide you. Magisterium is an empty word. I have no doubt you'll fight when the time comes, and reap as great a tally as you always have, but your place is by the throne now, not on the walls.
Simonas listened, unable to keep the shame from welling up within him, as the Primarch reeled off his judgment. The power of those words came not from their delivery, which was issued more in sorrow than disdain, but the fact they were being uttered at all.
You have given great service, Captain General,
said Dorn. working to keep the worst of the hardness from his voice.
But this war has moved beyond you. It will be settled by the legions. If you wish to remain a part of it, you will have to find some way to fit around that.
This is why we strip the comfort of religion from humanity. These are the livers of vulnerability that faith cracks open in the human heart. Even a belief in a lie leads us to do good. Eventually, it leads to the truth. That we are a species alone in the dark, threatened by the laughing games of sentient malignancies that mortals would call gods.
Rare is the battle where the Emperor's custodians outnumber our foes. We are ever beset, surrounded upon all sides by heresy and foulness, just as is Terra itself. Yet like the throne world, we stand resolute, indefatigable, indomitable. Let the enemy come. Let them darken the horizon with their numbers. Still, we will prevail. Warriors in gold, armed with the finest weapons the Imperium had to offer, cleaved apart sentient nightmares in the ruins of a Xenos civilization, alongside their allies, the Sisters of Silence, psychic blanks whose very presence melted away the Imperium's influence, and contingents from the Mechanicum of Mars. The fighting was brutal. Tides of disgusting, horrifying demons ripped asunder against the men who had fought like lions. Spears were slammed into the floor as servitors rammed in ammunition in the blink of an eye. The glorious 10,000 gave everything they could in the defense of the webway, but it was not enough. Against a tide that would never end, against a force that was infinite. Upon the surface of Terra, Constantin acted as their representation on Terra's war council, a task that he knew was important, but each time reports came back of the fallen, more and more of the friends he knew, perhaps even some who he had trained. It took a toll. The Emperor was silent, locked in concentration upon the Golden Throne. For the first time in Constantin's life, he had no orders. He had to act upon his own interpretation of his master's will. Secrets had played a part in this whole rebellion, yet there was one still only known to the Emperor, Malcador, and Constantin. A dream slowly revealed to another, Ra Endymion, the son of Kojazu, one of the last tyrants of Terra that Constantin had slain, taking the boy for elevation into his brotherhood. The folly of Magnus had broken the wards around the webway, grounds the custodians fought so desperately for because of what it represented. Humanity was changing. Over time it would evolve. Its psychic powers would one day rival the nearly extinct Eldari. It was a metamorphosis that could not be unguided. This is why we strip the comfort of religion from humanity. These are the livers of vulnerability that faith cracks open in the human heart. Even if a belief in a lie leads us to do good, eventually it leads to the truth that we are a species alone in the dark, threatened by the laughing games of sentient malignancies that mortals would call gods. Even one group, left unattended, left to the predations of the comfort of religion, could be corrupted, taken advantage of by laughing, malignant gods. The utter hubris of a man trying to control trillions, to chase humanity down until all was within his grasp. A plan to bring the species into the webway, out of the reach of the corruption that would taint our evolution. It was the singular vision at the heart, The dream that the Emperor had told Constantin of long ago. The dream that Magnus's mistake had doomed. It would be very easy to utterly despise the creature or creatures that had doomed your entire species. The Primarchs. After years of fighting, the 10,000 now barely numbered a functional 1,000 custodians. The webway foothold was lost, and with a last desperate act, the Emperor had 1,000 human psychers sacrificed to the Golden Throne. Like a blazing star, their king thundered into the webway. The sight, the brilliant aura, renewed the near muscle-locked custodians. With a roar and tide of brilliant spears, they thundered down to follow their king against hell itself. Radiant power that was humanity itself purged miles of the webway corridors, allowing a respite for the survivors to seal the webway gate below Terra. The loss and the strategic decisions angered Rogal Dorn. He was right. The custodians had bled themselves for a battle they could not win. You never resisted it. The orders were outdated, yet they couldn't maneuver around the orders of their source, their king. The mind truly does make some powerless and give strength to others. You'd all rather have died following a command than countermand it. Constantin and Dorn, the Custodes and the Primarchs, both forged by the Emperor, but the ability to truly think freely was a gift or a curse denied to Constantin, a choice that showed its weakness when the very being his existence orbited was silent. Dorn could sense it within him, never quite able to mask the disdain he had for the Primarchs, how he saw their free will as an error in their forging. But now it did not matter. Even with Dorn pointing out all the flaws, the failures, and the position they were now in, words that would drive any man to indignation, Constantin felt nothing, and yet the task remains before us. They needed to present a united front. The protection of the Imperium, of the Emperor, was all that mattered. I am nothing. The words he spoke to Ushatan centuries ago always remained true. An instrument to be cast aside when its function is performed. An instrument. A weapon did not get upset, but nor did a weapon doubt. When all others were panicked, resigned to the fact that they would have to face Horus without guidance, unsure that victory was possible, Constantin was unwavering. He believed, with absolute certainty, that the Emperor would speak, that if this was the fate given to them, they would face it. Constantin, Malcador, Dorn, Jagatai Khan, and Sanguinius, with all preparations made, found the darkness, corruption finally creep into the Sol system. Legions, once birthed upon Terra, who had fought besides Constantin at the end of the Unification of Terra, had come home, bringing death and chaos. The layered defense of the Sol system was tested, each stage designed to bleed the traitorous forces as they grew closer to the throne world. Thousands had died, as ships the size of cities clashed in the deafening, hollow, uncaring coldness in the void of space. Horus, and now the fully corrupted forces of the traitors were in the sky. From the elevated such as Constantin to the ordinary people who just lived on Terra, they saw the drop pods falling like tears of nightmare. Ordnance fell upon the sacred ground of humanity's birthplace. The smoke and fire began to clog the atmosphere, and so the Siege of Terra had begun. They were approaching through the smog and fire. They could see them. The traitors, their armor, their weapons, and their features had been contorted. Blood, pus, extra limbs, surgically grafted technology. Their very souls had been poisoned by the influence of laughing, vile entities, the gods of chaos, undisciplined, bloodthirsty butchers, warriors that reminded Constantin of the Thunder Warriors, unworthy soldiers that needed to be put down. The traitors in their hundreds of thousands launched themselves against the Lion's Gate spaceport, an ongoing conflict that pitted the brilliant minds of Rogal Dorn and the traitor Primarch Perturabo of the Iron Warriors. The Loyalists had fought bravely, but they were eventually overwhelmed. The forces of darkness entrenched themselves, and then pressed further towards the heart of the Imperium's capital. Constantin deployed many of his custodians, such as Aemon Taromachian, to scour the grounds of the palace. Strange creatures had been appearing, demons, breaking the boundary between the material and immaterial. Constantin himself began to hunt them down, using his Apollonian spear to slice and pierce the walking abominations. The unfathomable existence of dark, sentient thought, the demons' so-called life, flashed through Constantin's mind due to the power of his Emperor-gifted weapon. The corruption of chaos clashed against his mind, finding no purchase. Each demon slain was a test of his character, searching through his soul for even the smallest flaw, something no mortal man could ever endure. The days turned into weeks, and then months. Ash and smoke clogged the atmosphere. No matter how long Terra existed, it would never be the same. Scarred by the forces of hell itself, millions were dead, and the fate of those still living was a thought that would send shivers of panic down your spine. Constantin met with Rogal Dorn once more. The two had simply become weapons, no time for rest, both their minds and bodies strained by the demands the Imperium had on them. It was then that Dorn uttered a thought he meant to keep private. We were born for more. It was an unguarded moment, but before Dorn could brush it aside, Valdor held his gaze. In those eyes, Dorn saw a sad hint of sympathy. A moment so utterly human it had no place on a custodian's face. Born to fashion a future and enjoy it, said Dorn. Enjoy it, yes, be part of it, not just its midwives. When we were made, the future was full, and now there is only war. All those centuries ago, at the side of the Emperor, Constantin had heard his martyr talk of the vision, the salvation of the species. You are the bringer of the new age. You are the warden of the old. You are the destroyer. You are the preserver. Constantin and the custodians were meant to be humanity's guides, and then, when the dream was achieved, he was meant to enjoy it. Perhaps it was why the Emperor had given him the Apollonian spear, why he had made sure Constantin never lost his humanity, because it would be needed in the peace to come. Constantin got tired. He made mistakes. He was human, however elevated and transformed. The being that lay beneath was a man. We will prevail, Rogal, he said. One day, you'll break your sword and hang up your shield, and you will sit and laugh, and from the window see golden towers standing without fear, or aegis, or batteries, freed from all possibility of threat because of what we do now. Constantin believed it, utterly and truly. I have to. The alternative is unacceptable. The Siege of Terra continued. Jagatai Khan, Constantin and Raldoron of the Blood Angels assembled a force, preparing to sally out in the defense of the Colossi Gate. 3 figures that seemed like heroes of long-lost myths to the mortal defenders, barely holding on. Militant General Burr met the 3 figures. The commander of the front looked on in shock as the enormous Primarch Jagatai Khan told him he had deference as a leader of the zone. Staring into the horrors that was the traitorous forces, he told the three, "It is my honor, lords. With respect, I'd rather strip bare and charge those bastards alone than give any of the three of you an order." The Khan roared with laughter as Valdor and Constantin smiled. It felt good to be reminded of what they were fighting for. A brief light of humanity in the darkness of an unending war. The task force leapt forward, cleaving demons in numbers worthy of songs of praise, as they felt the vengeance of humanity beat in their chest. As the siege continued, months of ceaseless war, as Constantin and the defenders fought to near exhaustion, protecting the weakening emperor upon the golden throne, who in turn battled with the Imperium, with the dwindled forces of the Custodes, dragged to every corner of the conflict. Duties they had attended to during the times of peace began to be neglected. Deep below the palace, inside the infamous Blackstone prison, where all kinds of foul artifacts and prisoners were kept, one slipped out. Basilio Foe, the mad scientist who long ago had sought to create a virus designed specifically to kill Legiones Astartes. Running through the wreckage and ruins of the palace, the mad scientist found himself the prey of a monster dreaded throughout the galaxy, a Night Lord's legionary. Wounded and at the edge of death, he was saved. As the Emperor's greatest weapon slew the traitor, Constantin debated with himself, sparing Basilio Foe, as the weapon he was creating may be of use. Men ought to be either indulged or utterly destroyed. The injury done to a man ought to be such that vengeance cannot be feared. His emperor was silent, and so he would keep any weapon he thought may protect that being he orbited. Even if he respected and even liked some, he wouldn't hesitate to eliminate all the Astartes and even the Primarchs. The Siege of Terra had reaped a toll that would reverberate throughout the Imperium. The sacrifice of many, from the ordinary to the super soldier, had bought time. The Traitors' alliance was falling apart, and in a last gambit, the corrupted War Master Horus lowered the shield upon his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, baiting the Loyalists into a strike they had to take. With Malcador, a figure Constantin had known for centuries, sacrificing himself upon the Golden Throne, the Loyalists prepared for their strike. The Emperor, Constantin, Sanguinius and Dorn, alongside the greatest warriors they had left, boarded the Vengeful Spirit. They prepared to end this heresy.
Because your own strength is unequal to the task, do not assume that it is beyond the powers of man. But if anything is within the powers and province of man, believe that it is within your own compass also.
A new age had been birthed, one that will last 10,000 years before its eventual expiry. A staggering, limping age that will see the last vigor of the Crusade dampened down and stamped out. An age of forgetting and smothering. War will never cease from that point, not truly, but on Terra itself, a shocked silence descends. For a strange and short interval, like a caught breath after trauma, the world holds itself static. The surviving titans are like haze-wreathed statues on the grey horizon. Fighting men and women stand, their arms slack by their sides, their dull eyes staring at the falling ash. It is into this world that the Wolf King returns at last, too late to influence the outcome, yet too early to escape it. It is his surviving grey hunters who stalk through the echoing corridors, and banished the last of the ghosts from the still hot stone. Even the Primarchs are humbled by what has taken place. They no longer strut, not like they did on Ullanor 7 years before. They are diminished, the ones who survive. Valdor finds him in a place that was designed as an observatory, but will become, over 1,000 painful years, of all things, a chapel.
Your brother is looking for you.
He says. He means the lion, who has come back, also too late, and who now rages through the corridors, lost in a storm of grief and madness. Russ looks up. His mane is matted, his fangs look blunt. When he smiles, it is gruesome, a retching of flesh once ruddy, and apt to genuine mirth.
Still carrying that damned thing,
He observes. Valdor does not know if he can ever let go of it. His fingers have been clamped around the grip for so long that they are hard to prise open. The illuminations still echo in his mind. Thousands of them. He has killed thousands.
I am Battle Brother Sky of the World Eaters. My imperfection is my doubt.
I am Shadow of the Open Hand Cult. My imperfection is my fear.
I am the demon Bile bringer. My imperfection is my name alone.
Where is yours?
Valdor asks. His voice cracks with fatigue. Even for him, this has been like a lingering death. He cannot forget what he saw on the Vengeful Spirit, nor what was lost on those Neverborn infused decks. Russ snorts.
I told you I never used it.
I gave it to you myself. Here, before you left.
And it did what you told me it would.
Russ looks straight at Valdor.
Only my blade illuminates those it strikes, not the hand that carries it. Did that achieve anything? I don't know. I never will now.
Valdor lowers himself, crouching on cramped, stiff muscles.
Nothing he did was without purpose. A seed may flower many centuries from its planting. I have seen it myself.
Russ looked sour.
You never stop. Even now. Even here. You're still spouting those platitudes?
Do not be so hasty to write off his wisdom.
He's dead, Constantin!
Russ roared, finally rousing himself and shaking the dust from his pelt.
All the plans are dead too. We've pissed like dogs all over them and now the galaxy stinks from our spore. Look around you. Try to see this world as those with a soul see it. Try just for a moment to be angry.
Valdor does try. He indulges the Lord of Fenris and tries. All he hears, though, are the voices of the slain.
You cannot get rid of it.
He says quietly, knowing the danger of such words.
Understand this. When you took it up on Seraphina, it claimed you as much as you claimed it. It will keep coming back. It will follow you through time, for it was made for you and no other. Some things survive. This is one of them.
Russ's shoulders slump. He sighs deeply, and flecks of bloody acid stain his robes.
You always did accept your fate, but I never could. I thought that was why he made me the way he did. Now I just think we're all tainted, and I don't know anything anymore.
For some reason that triggers something in Valdor, as if from the catacombs far below, he hears the echo of a voice that will never speak out loud again. Flux and stasis.
You will not change. Neither will I. That cannot be random.
Russ is no longer listening.
The greatest sin on Fenris. To fail your Jarl.
And then, Valdor does something so out of character that even he is surprised by it. But then, this is a time of extremity. The moment when one epoch passes to another, and all but the most mechanist soul cannot fail to be stirred by that. He places his hand on Russ's shoulder and exerts a faint pressure of reassurance.
This is not over yet, Wolf King.
Valdor says, in as empathetic a manner as he has ever managed.
There are sagas yet.
Valdor looks up. The candles glutter in the chamber, shaken by a cold breeze that has no place in Terra's humid atmosphere. He looks out of his window and first sees mountains, blue-black against Fenrisian night. Then they are city spires again, still half in ruins, testament to the throne world's fertile powers of reconstruction. There is so much more he would have liked to have done here, for the galaxy is bleeding and everything is in ruins. Rebuilding must be done right. The surviving tenets of the old crusade cannot be allowed to die, and even his custodians are forgetting so much. But he cannot tell the Wolf King to do one thing and allow himself to do another. Valdor has always been bound by the laws, even those he made for himself. He rises, reaching for his armor. By the time he leaves, there'll be nothing left of him in the chamber. No sign, no message, no cryptic clue. He slips out unnoticed, for the path has been prepared for a long time. And unlike Russ, he takes no companions with him. That, too, is as it should be. He has never been a gregarious soul. He looks back only once, just as his lander powers up from the platform. The heart of the old palace is still there, horribly damaged, but structurally intact, and within it, buried deep, is the one who made those things in the beginning. For a moment he cannot take his eyes off of that sarcophagus, trying to guess whether he knew how this would transpire from the start, or whether, as seems likely, this is a desperate chance set against unthinkable calamity. Once, Valdor half dreaded the appearance of his master's voice within his mind, knowing that it would be there only to give orders or make demands. But now that it is silent, he misses it. There are many species of solitude, but this, for one such as he, bound inexorably to the one who had made him, is among the worst.
Only in death,
he whispers before leaving. The Emperor was crippled, interned upon the golden throne as a carrion lord, the price for the destruction of Horus. A sorrow so deep and so soul-haunting washed over the victorious defenders of the Imperium. From the mortals to the Primarchs, such as Leman Russ, all except one, Constantin. He believed that this must have been foreseen. It was impossible that his king did not factor this into his plans. From his birth on Terra, Constantin had been taken, transformed into something so far above the limits of a mortal man, but it came at a cost. No joy, no hate, no fear, unbreakable without growth, immortal without passion. A mind of power that didn't have the strength of choice. He never chose to serve the Emperor. There was nothing more for the Emperor to take from him. It was a cost taken for the dream of the species, a dream that needed custodians to protect it. The Emperor had taken much, but there was something he could give him. The Apollonian spear, a tool that kept him tied to his humanity as he waged war from Terra all the way to the stars. A Great Crusade, a war to bring all of humanity together, to save the species. And after 2 centuries, when that dream was within their fingertips, it was ripped away by those whose forging was flawed. The Primarchs. Constantin chose to employ any method, any deed that would achieve the protection of his king. It did not matter if it was honorable. Constantin was born to defend the Emperor. He would let the Imperium and even humanity die for him. All Constantin did, all he endured, all who he had killed and carried with him in his mind was for the Emperor. But now the Emperor was silent. For so long, Constantin, in his heart of hearts, dreaded that voice, the orders that would command him to do the impossible. But now it was gone. The hollowness, the free thinking was horrifying. He had changed. In his last meeting with Leman Russ, he showed a display of humanity no other custodian was capable of. He had utter faith that this must be part of his master's plan. Nothing he did was without purpose. A seed may flower many centuries from its planting. I have seen it myself. Because your own strength is unequal to the task, do not assume that it is beyond the powers of man. But if anything is within the powers and providence of man, believe that it is within your own compass also. Constantin believed he had made the choice, perhaps the first choice in his life. He had the strength where all others were melancholic. Only in death would be the last words uttered by the first custodian of the Emperor as he left Terra. Time for the Imperium passed. This age faded into myth. Constantin, the Primarchs, all figures of mythology, to an empire that has rotted for over 10,000 years. A vision of a far-off future state, spun out of reality and into the cold halls of an undiscovered time, where the galaxy itself was darkened by strife, and whole worlds were cast into flame. A zealous, authoritarian nightmare. As the Imperium has rotted, a name, a title has been spoken in hushed whispers, linked to schemes that had danced in the shadows of the rotten Imperium. A name who is the enemy of the Inquisition, the forces of Chaos and Xenos alike. Inside a pocket dimension, with an army of psychic blanks, winged space marines, and super soldiers, armored in gold, a figure seeks a name, the true name of the Emperor of mankind, a power that could have hold over the most powerful soul in the galaxy, control in the hands of the King in Yellow. Constantin Valdor, the first custodian, hero of the Unification Wars, the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, the Emperor's most loyal servant. Because what if the dream that Constantin's existence orbited did not die? What if it had just changed? What if to save his Emperor and the species it required something incredible, a death, an apotheosis? What if humanity required a god emperor, all at the hands of a king in yellow? A dream was created long ago, and a warrior was forged to protect it. He was its protector. He was its custodian. We were born for more, born to fashion a future and enjoy it, because only in death does duty end.